Hello.
Oh, welcome to 2024.
Hey, I'm ready for it, I think, by and large.
You had me convinced until the end.
I was like, oh, I think that's a bit of masking happening. Am I ready for it? Uh, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I like I'm coming off of
Hmm.
like a night like it's MLK weekend or it's the end of MLK weekend, and so I've been reflecting a lot about resistance and like where am I at? And I went to the March on Washington over the weekend as part of my birthday weekend. And it was like a day of joy and resistance and like comedy show, but also being with hundreds of thousands of people who came in solidarity. And I just think about how the media portrays things as violent and mean and us versus them. And this thing felt sacred, spiritual, like being led by Palestinians and Muslims, and there was no, it was about their liberation. It was
Mhm.
about care for their community, care for the world, care for Yemen. Like it was care, it was like care, it was nothing about wishing ill on anyone else, but just wanting freedom and wanting self-determination. Um, and it was beautiful to be amongst that, to be part of something bigger and to even have a little bit of hope or connection to something. And so, yeah, I'm on the liberation train right now. Yeah, that's the word I'm using, liberation.
I love it. And it sounds like obviously we talked prior, so between that and what you're saying now, it just sounds like an experience so rooted in love.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, I
That,
felt so much love,
yes.
so much love.
Mm.
And I think sometimes I feel like I like being in person with other people
Yes.
reminds you we're all interconnected. Like all
Mhm.
of us are interconnected. And it's really about all of us getting free. And if anybody is saying it's not about all of us getting free, then they have a different agenda.
That's
But
right.
like the people I hang out with, they want everybody to be free.
Mhm.
Um, there is no need for oppression. Like we might have different paths to get to that freedom, but I guess I appreciate, I mean, I haven't checked into news to see if it was even how much of it was really talked about, but I think it was like speaking truth about the pain um, and the violence, and that we want it to stop. It's got to be
Totally.
a better way.
And I love because what I just kind of took away from what you said is this idea that community or connection is part of what generates hope,
Mhm.
and individual agency, right? For our listeners, Natalie and I were just talking, and I was saying that I'm struggling with the hope piece a little bit. But I mean, to your point, I think I've been feeling like I need community so much, with other people who share my values, and I think that's why I'm feeling that need so much because of that connection between community and hope
Mhm.
and solidarity and love. And yeah, it just makes the work joyful then instead of something that's like required of us, or about division. And I love that. I love that you got to have that experience on your birthday weekend, no less.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea of like I've been thinking a lot about how do I embody resistance? Like what are all the little ways? Um, from like an email signature to a newsletter to the podcast, just disrupting the status quo. And you and I have talked about this a lot about all the different ways we can resist the mainstream um, powers that be that want us to not be awake, that want us not to rest, that want us not to be liberated because
Right.
it doesn't benefit the existing systems that can be oppressive to a good portion of the population.
For sure. Yeah, no, I'm with you and thinking about slightly different things, but I've been trying to think about again, how do I build it in so that it becomes more of a way of life as opposed to a transactional checklist of, because that checklists fall by the wayside, right? The minute you have a personal crisis, you get overwhelmed with the other checklists in your life, checklist can go away, but how do I really like build it in every little facet and area of my life? And I've been looking for something that's really in my control, because I've been struggling with how many things feel outside of my control and like what's my real impact. But I've always been fascinated by food, in terms of the systems that dictate how it works, as well as, food as medicine and more of a naturalistic, holistic way to live. And so I've just been learning about America's industrial food complex. And that's where I'm feeling excited about, is moving my family toward being really intentional about what we put in our mouths, where we get it from, getting curious about how it's being sourced. Is it being ethically sourced? Is it sustainably sourced? Is it cruelty free? Because I'm jazzed about this one thing that I can really get control over, and like it just affects so many things, in terms of, the climate and environmental racism, and investing in alternative systems, because that's what I've realized I love doing so much, that subverting, like,
Yes.
how do we subvert the system and create something new, or invest in something that already exists but is like doesn't get much airtime? That's really exciting to me. So that's where I've just been doing a lot of learning about that recently, and I'm very excited.
Oh, I'm so excited for you and your family.
Yeah.
So tell me, like, what would be like two things that people could do like almost right away?
So for my family, I started because I know that for me, I could easily go down a rabbit hole where this becomes like my hyper focus and I do nothing else and I go to make sweeping changes that we can't sustain, right?
Sure.
I'm trying to do this in a slower, less urgent,
Yeah.
more sustainable way. So I'm just like, what is one animal-based product that myself or my kids eat on a very, very regular basis? And that's cream cheese. They could have bagels every single day of their lives. And so I just started to do some research about dairy for like vegan cream cheeses. And not just like what tastes the best, but also like what are they using? And is it sustainable? Is it ethically sourced? What are the practices that feel important to know about here? And I'm just gonna swap that one thing for now. And of course, there's like a few other things I'm making, but like I think generally for me, it was important to just think about what's one thing that we can easily swap that might make a big difference for us as individuals, but would put us in place in our like our rightful place in line of like how do we start to change this, at a bigger in a bigger way, on a bigger scale.
Oh,
Um,
I love
yeah.
this.
Yeah. Um, Already anticipating all the things that'll come up, all the barriers and the challenges and whatever. But yeah, I think it includes like starting to, because some of these products are not available, like on Instacart or Target or Amazon, right? So it's
Sure.
gonna force me to go to a local grocery store that I've never
Right.
been to before,
Yeah.
which is locally owned. So yeah, it seems like a small thing, but
The
it's
ripple
something
effect
that,
of it.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think about how hard it is to make those intentional. I think about like even like going to the local farmers market and like
Totally.
just like little things that can be hard. I'm thinking about my faith community had a guest speaker yesterday, and it was someone from the local indigenous group, so Lenny Lenape over here in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. And the whole conversation was around land acknowledgements and like, there are different conversations. Should you do it? Should you not do it? Like she was talking about it should come from a place of love, whatever your land acknowledgement is. And to go further than that, right? Like I remember like, what are you doing to be in right relationship? Right. And so like when I hear like you talking about this, I think about like how indigenous practices are about, we don't own the land, right?
Right.
Like and how to be in right relationship. And so thinking about related to food and animals and the planet and like what are the daily actions we're doing that is contributing to sustainability and what is detracting from that
Right.
and like what will be available for our descendants if we don't make, these little incremental changes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's so, again, this because this is like the way the systems are designed. I think it's so easy to just do what you always do, and whether that be with the food you put in your mouth or other things. So to just pause and get really curious about something, that's an act of resistance in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
And I just think it's so easy for us to get, for me, I'll say at least, that if it's not big, if it's not this really huge effort or an obvious effort or something where it feels like I'm going to do this and then this thing is going to happen. It almost feels like, well, is it worth it? And really trying to deconstruct that idea, that it's almost some of the most powerful ways of disrupting or being resistant are invisible, are tiny, are the
Mhm.
things that we do or don't do every single day,
Right.
and it's that's liberating. That's a fun
Mhm.
thought.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can feel that heaviness in my body as we talk about resistance and liberation. And I think where I've been at in waves the last couple of months is noticing that I'm more afraid. Not afraid not afraid like something is immediately going to happen to me, but like showing up as my authentic self in this like black, fat, queer body that is often trying to challenge the status quo, feeling like it's scary,
Yeah.
right? Like to resist. Like when I hit send on a newsletter, I like take a deep breath because it's like how will it land in people's inboxes? How will they receive it? Who will they forward it to? Like all of these things where it used to bring me more joy.
Mm,
Now I feel more of the heaviness of like this stuff is getting real,
yeah.
right? Like I'm pushing the edges of stuff. Like even just saying I went to the march, it feels like should I even say that out loud? Because other people aren't hearing that it's about love
Right.
and like
Right.
humanity getting free and breaking up with all of these systems that want us to like go back in time or something. And so, yeah, I can feel that heaviness of like, it's hard. Like, whatever we're talking about, whether it's like, I'm going to try to break up with Amazon, or I'm going to try to like use like locally sourced things, or I'm going to like speak truth to power, or I'm going to risk losing my job, or like whatever it might be. It's like scary to
Totally.
resist. Like, even like if I think on a like even a different level, like my son who's in 10th grade, his school was on a lockdown on Thursday
Oh
for a
no.
couple of hours because there were kids with guns reportedly in the building. And he's texting us from this lockdown. Um and then the next day he's like, do I need to go to school? Like, and I said, I said, yes, it's going to get, I don't think it's going to be better if you don't go. Because, like, the reality is like, you got to go back to school, right? Like, so I just think, like, sometimes just showing up for life
It's
is
hard.
scary, right? Because you just don't know, like, who's going to come in and, like, is it ever really safe? And, like, how do you act as if it's safe enough? to keep going?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Oh my God. I recognize that I'm feeling so in what you just said. Like, is he okay? Are you okay? Like, I can't imagine that moment as a mother.
Yeah. And I mean, this is it's so sad that it was other kids, like something gang related. So other kids coming in and the school doesn't tell us much, right? Because, they send these communications out like we had a lockdown and blah, 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 and it's an active investigation, so we can't tell you that much more. And I'm sure they don't want people to get too
Right.
intense, but like the reality is like, this, some of it is urban trauma, some of it is, my kids, my son, like living with the reality that there are some kids who are involved in gangs, and this is the life they've chosen, this is the life that's been chosen for them, this is how they think they get free, or this is how they pump up their self-esteem, or they survive, or I don't know, right? And it turned out on Friday that it could have been an excused day, but they didn't communicate that. It could have been like, so it's kind of like, they had counseling was available, but it's like,
Right.
my son is like, what am I going to talk about? Like, so I think he watched like a Godfather movie in school. Like that's what he did because like no real work happened.
Right.
And he's like a movie buff. So tomorrow he'll go back to school, for real. And yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
Ay, ay, ay. Wow. Well, I'm so sorry that you all went through that. That is like a parent's worst nightmare, right?
yeah,
But thinking about just the idea of fear, right? Like when you're trying to do something different, when you're resisting, the fear. I'm so grateful that you just said that you experience fear, because I didn't even necessarily know that. Like we've talked about moments of fear, but
yeah.
I didn't know what kind of like an active part that was in your work. And I feel relieved hearing that. Uh,
Yeah.
I get scared all the time, and I see you, and I wouldn't have necessarily like assumed that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I just keep telling myself, feel the fear, do it anyway. Feel the
Right.
fear, do it anyway. Because it's like, if these are my small little things of resistance, ancestors and elders and other people out there in the front lines are doing things that are feel bigger. And if this is my little part, I guess it's like I just keep trying to tell myself like it wouldn't be a revolution if everybody was doing it. It wouldn't be a revolution if I had all this ease.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I'm just trying to build my capacity to sit in the backlash, to sit in the whatever is going to come next,
Yeah.
right? And I think I feel more fear because a couple of months ago somebody took something that I wrote and tried to get me to lose my job as
Oh,
a result of it. And so I think that
yeah.
fear is real, right? Is that like not everybody is trying to get free.
Right.
And if you live in certain bodies, they particularly aren't rooting for you.
Right.
And I feel like the heaviness of these other Black women out there who are in the limelight, either by death by suicide or by being, strongly encouraged to resign from their leadership positions. And uh, I'm rooting for everyone. And particularly Black and brown and queer and neurodiverse and people who are differently abled. Like I'm rooting for everybody, particularly the most marginalized. And so like if I just think about myself, I can go down a rabbit hole. But if I like expand to I'm not the only one out there doing the resisting, and if more of us do the resisting, it makes those of us who come from marginalized identities less vulnerable.
Right. Right. So eye on the prize, constantly eye on the prize. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm grateful for you kind of normalizing that the work is not easy, that it's not risk-free, that it's scary and there's a lot to lose, which is the point in many ways.
Right,
Um, and that just because that is the value and that is the point doesn't necessarily mean that your emotional life is like, let's go all the
right,
time,
right. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Especially as someone who's like introverted and quiet and
yeah,
like, right, like fly under the radar, right? Like all of this stuff takes effort and energy.
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, oh, I was thinking about something in terms of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and it's gone.
I mean, I often think about like the quote that goes around about like if you wonder what you would have done in these different time periods, just check out what you're doing now. And and it's hard to know, right? Like if I lived in the 60s, what would I have been doing? I don't know. I guess it depends on which version of me was
Yeah,
awake at that time, right? Like
yeah.
I'm doing stuff now I wouldn't have done 10 years ago. So um but this idea of being like leaving the world better, that's important
Mhm.
to me.
For sure. For sure. And I'm always thinking about how do because I'm thinking about this stuff all the time, but I want to make sure that I'm bringing my like family, especially my kids,
Mhm.
along for the ride. Um, yeah, and that is a constant struggle. I know yours are bigger. Um, and so that feels like a constant struggle because I want to honor their ages, um and their frequent overwhelm just because they're little and neurodiverse and have all these like sensory things and like whatever, and start to build that muscle, right? Because like there's can't expect people to build it when I don't, on their own, whatever. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And again, that balance between it doesn't have to be this big, I don't want to be the family that, and again, there's not judgment, just whatever. But for me, I don't want my family to be the family that like goes and like collects trash as a family on MLK Day and then like we don't think about anything. Like we don't, so it's like again, how do I build it in not just for me but for my family, like, and make it a way of living for my kids as well, and something that we can do in a family that's sustainable, and a way of being, not just this transactional thing that we do on certain days,
Mm.
which is great. I'm glad for any contribution that people want to make, but just a bit more nuanced. Um, yeah, I've been sitting with that.
Yeah, I definitely always have the thought that I'm not doing enough related to
Always.
parenting, and that I'm also really trying to parent from this abolitionist like mindset, which some days are harder than other days of turn in terms of not like just being a guide, right? Like what am I exposing to them to? What am I talking about with them? Like I didn't have them come to the march. And I think part of that is they're getting older, and part of that is like we were doing other things in that trip too. But yeah, it just feels like I like this idea of little incremental things versus these like one and done things.
Yes.
Um, and I feel like I'm modeling for them. Like I hope that when they're adults and they're looking back at their mom, that they remember that she was, quietly resisting all the time. Like I hope that they will remember that, and find their ways to resist
Right.
the things that matter to them.
You're so right. And that's a reminder. I should probably like put that like all, post-it notes all over my house. Like, um, be it. You don't have to teach it. You can just be it, right?
Right.
Yeah. And that maybe that's enough, right? And that if you're being it and then talking about it too, like that's something that I've been focusing on in terms of collective liberation with my kids, is like, if there's a decision that needs to be made, where it's appropriate for like Nick and I to make that decision, and as opposed to like have more of a family discussion, I'm going to at least talk to them about our decision-making process and the factors that went in. And like, we still are making the final call, but I can have that conversation with them, and like, and that those conversations can are again part of like the little things that we're doing to just be it and model it. Yeah, that it doesn't always have to be so big and obvious, right? And I think that's a big shift in my personal collective liberation journey. Is before it was like, it wasn't meant in a performative way, but like it was performative, right? It was all about like the big thing and being loud on social media. And now it's like, it is slowly reversing that, or finding the balance of the big and obvious and the intangible or invisible, yeah, it's a big shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I'm feeling my way into it because I think for me, my discernment is, am I gonna choose to write less newsletters or whatever because it's not as nourishing for me, or I don't like some of the backlash that comes from it, or is that my way of retreating to safety and comfort, right? Like that's what I'm trying to tease out. Like when entrepreneurial stuff connects with like anti-racism, like collective liberation stuff, when they intertwine, then it becomes like so messy.
Yeah,
And I feel like I am doing my best work now that it is not my main job. Like that ability to be able to like soften, and like the word I'm using this year, downshift, has allowed me to have freedom to now show up differently
yeah,
because it's not attached to my finances as much.
right,
It's more about like, this is my love. Like, this is what
right.
I'm loving liberation. There's this quote that I heard Resma Menachem say in a conversation with Lamarad Owens. I think it was actually Lamarad Owens who said it to Resma Menachem. Like, so two Black um, people that I adore in terms of like the work that they put out in the world, and who are like really fighting for Black liberation. They said like, um, if you don't understand that I'm trying to get free, you are going to completely misunderstand everything that I do.
100%.
Right. And like, and I
Yeah,
think like for me, that's what I keep grounding myself in, is like, I'm trying to get free. I'm trying to get my family free. I'm trying to get Black people free. I'm trying to get everybody free. And if that's not where your mind is at, then you're going to misinterpret the things I do. So you're going to call me dangerous, or you're going to say I'm uneducated, or that I change my mind too much, or I'm impulsive, or there she goes again, right? But it's like, it's all about freedom. It's all
yeah,
about liberation. And I love being liberated, and I want everybody to like have that energy.
totally. Totally. Oh, I love that quote. I'm gonna have to get those names from you and look them up. I love that quote. And in that liberation, right, is you also get to choose what gets your energy and what
Yeah,
doesn't,
yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
again, moving out of that binary that we're always talking about, like, I'm sure there are certain situations or spaces or systems or relationships where, say, your own peace or retreating into safety is a valid choice sometimes, or
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Like, and
absolutely.
that you're the only one that gets to decide that.
Yep.
And that people can have like their opinions or whatever, but it doesn't frankly matter,
Right.
because you are working to get yourself liberated. So
Yeah.
only you know
Right.
what that
Absolutely.
looks like.
Yeah. There isn't one path, even though the world wants you to think that.
That's
And I
right.
think like that's what I love about like choice, right? Is like, so when I hear you about like looking at food and like more options to be sustainable. I think that's amazing. And I'm not ready to do that. Right. Right. And it's like, and I can own that I'm not ready to do that. Not that there's any, like, I think it's like valid and it makes sense. And one day I hope to be ready to do that, like to put my energy there. And I think like what gets me at times is that people poo-poo people trying to get free,
That's
people trying
right.
to be liberate, right? It's kind of like, if that's not your thing, okay, but we don't need to put it down. We don't need to get in the way. Why don't we cheer people along? I want you to keep telling me about it, because then that's sprinkling things in
Right.
that then like maybe one day I will be ready to
Right.
like take a thing, like to take a path there.
Right. Right. Or even just play with something, right? Like I love the anti-resolution of like intention setting or just dreaming, right? Like we can just play in things without having to like commit and make a goal and there,
Right. Right.
uh, we just get to play and experiment and change our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if the world is a playground, then why don't we do more play?
Totally. Yeah, so I love all of that. Just makes me feel like I have agency, right? And it becomes easier to let go of people's perception of me or judgments of me or opinions of me, whatever, when I can stay grounded in liberation, right? And liberation means that I always have choice
Mhm.
about what my path looks like.
Right.
And and that's it.
Mhm.
Period.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Uh,
that's the freedom, right? Is
and
to
that's
know
freedom.
that there is a choice there.
That's right. And that's the only way to stay on a path of collective liberation, right? Because how can I possibly work toward other people's freedom if I don't feel free, if I'm feeling caged? Because then that it's so much easier to be us versus them and like try to dictate and judge other people's paths. Like it's it's got to be both at the same time.
Right.
Otherwise it's not really liberation, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me think about, like, sometimes I think people don't really get what it means to like center particular people or particular causes. Doesn't mean that the others don't matter, right?
Right.
It's just like I'm
Right.
just centering it, right? It's like, so like when I talk about Black liberation, I'm not only talking about Black people getting free, I'm just saying I'm centering Black voices, Black identities, Black ways of being. And for me, that connects me to everybody's liberation, right? And so like how do we begin, like to be queer, like centering queer lives doesn't mean all the straight people like we're coming for you, right? Like it's just like
Right.
decentering whiteness doesn't mean like I have anything against white people, right? Like I want them to be liberated too, because if they feel liberated in a way that is
Yep,
expansive, then we all get free.
that's right. Right before I came on, I used this morning to kind of get anchored in 2024, and I was making like a little, I don't know, manifestation, vision board, whatever you want to call it. And I was just,
Was it a physical board?
it was on Google Slides.
Oh, nice.
Um, but I was like layering in all these images and had to do a little, I'm not that tech savvy, and was like, how do I make certain images lay
Bigger.
on top of others,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
right? And that's what
There
you just
must be a
said made me,
program out there for this, it seems like.
well, I'm learning. But that's what I sometimes see things like visually. And when you were talking, it's like everybody, if we're talking about a Google slide and collective liberation, everybody's on the board.
Yeah,
Every single human is on the board. And then it's just like, so what are we overlaying? Like, what are we pulling out so that it stands out? What are, and yeah, that's exactly. Everybody gets to be on the board.
yeah,
Um, it's just what
absolutely.
we're going to focus on or who we're going to amplify
Mhm.
is going to change depending on the
Yeah,
moment and
absolutely.
season in our own lives and who's most at risk, whatever. But
Yeah. And how do we collectively build that muscle, that language, that vocabulary that says everybody deserves life, worth, dignity, safety, like access to basic every single person.
Right. Without being accused of being like, are you saying all lives matter? Right. It's like,
Right.
yeah, it's the, that's what I love so much about our conversations. It's nuance in a world, or at least in this season of the world where nobody does nuance anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the invitation to be curious, right?
Yes.
If I say whatever, like, I'm focusing on Black liberation this year, right? Like, what's in your conditioning that makes you think that in some ways I'm not rooting for you?
Right.
Right? Like what's in your conditioning, right? Because it's not for me to be policed to like change my vocabulary so that you don't feel slighted. It's like what's in your conditioning that makes you in some way think that that doesn't include you,
Right.
right? Like what are the systems of oppression that centered, let's say, white lives, which clearly did not value Black lives? Like that's not liberation, that's oppression, that's domination, that's colonization, that's something different. And so like how do we begin to like really unpack of like the bigger systems that we've all been indoctrinated into that we need to break up with?
And we need to break up with. And when we focus on systems, it means we're uniting against a common enemy as opposed to
Yes.
arguing with one another.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, let's stay clear about, did you ever, I think it's a thing on social media I've seen where about ants, they put these two different types of ants in a jar, and everybody lives peacefully. All the ants live peacefully among one another until someone shakes the jar. And the minute
Um,
somebody shakes the jar, now they think that they're at war and they start attacking each other
oh
until
wow.
everybody's dead.
Jeez.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time, that it's so easy to become an ant who feels like we're under siege and but it's, and perhaps we are being attacked by another ant, and we have a right to feel about that, and we got to keep going more meta or deeper or whatever to understand the bigger picture of it all, that there's always some system behind it, always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's helpful to think of like contraction versus expansion and like how whenever I want to constrict to like be curious about that, like to stay with it, like not to force myself to open up if I'm not ready, but like to think about what is the fear, what's the shame, what's the thing? And like because I want to show up fully for this life for however long I'm here. I want to try to show up fully.
100%, right. And feel all the things and not guard
Yeah.
it, and
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, but to feel all of it is to be alive.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
feel the fear, do it anyway.
And that takes practice, right? Because that's fucking hard to
Yeah,
feel all of it,
yeah,
not
absolutely.
your heart, and to not retreat into
Mhm.
a stress or a trauma response like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when I told my kiddo, my 16-year-old, like to go to school the next day, it was like feel the fear and do it anyway. Like be with your community, be with your people, other
Mm,
people who went through the experience and are struggling, and like show up for each other.
yeah,
No shame if people needed to take the day off. And like when harm happens to communities, how do we keep showing up for
yeah,
each other?
right, right. Oh my God, I love that. I love that reframe, and that's the nuance, right? It wasn't like a pull yourself up
Yeah,
by
it
your
wasn't a suck it up.
bootstraps. No, no. But that middle option of community,
Mhm.
and how do we continue to show up for each other? Mm,
Yeah, and don't let this place get hijacked by all this other stuff.
right, right.
And like we build it up in our imagination, like all of these enemies, which I'm sure there are some enemies, but like for the most part, people are good, trying to do their best. And yeah, we fall short some days.
Certainly, right. I love that because, and I feel like we're always back to like love and curiosity, right?
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah, simple and yet hard.
yeah, right. The execution is the difference.
Yes, yes, yes.
Well,
Mm,
keep chatting.
yeah, that's right. Keep trying to awaken and rest just
Yep.
as much as we resist.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Which is the foundation for resistance, right?
Yeah,
Good stuff. That feels like a good place to end. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So keep subscribing, keep listening. Feel free to be in touch as you digest and metabolize, and hopefully you'll tune in for another episode of Rest and Awaken.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah, like, share, all the things, whatever else people do. We appreciate it.
Take
All right.
care.
Good talking to you.
Same. Bye.